Hello there. Welcome to the IWS podcast. I'm your host RJ, and I have a wonderful guest today, Mr. Richard Nichols. How you doing today, sir?
Very, very good. Very good.
Excellent,
It's a
excellent.
great day to be alive.
That it is. I know we have a little bit of our time difference, you being in the UK, but I'm
Yeah.
glad to have you here today. And obviously, you being a fellow provider as well, which we'll jump into in a little bit, is always exciting for me to talk to, especially you coming from a different part of the world. Because
Yeah.
I'm very curious about some of the issues that we are going to end up bringing up and discussing today, letting the audience learn a bit about you, and of course, I'm going to be sharing as well as we
Mm.
express more about where we come from, how we got into the field, all that good stuff. So I want to start with helping the audience and myself both learn a little bit more about you and a bit about your lived experiences growing up. How are your like family dynamics?
Well, um, I grew up in a working class mining town in the smack in the middle of England. Kind of lost, really, the Midlands of England.
Mm.
Here in England, people tend to talk about the north and they talk about the south, and nobody ever talks about the bit in the middle. And the Midlands often does get overlooked because of it. People from the south think I'm from the north. People from the north think I'm from the south. And it's strange how this sort of working class area in the middle often gets forgotten about. People talk about Birmingham and the industrial side of it, home of heavy metal and Black Sabbath and Judas Priest and things like that. So it's
Okay.
got a lot going for it, the Midlands. It really, really has.
Right.
And growing up in that area, um, you were not expected to do well. You were just sort
Okay.
of expected to go to school, maybe go to college, go and get a job, find a job somewhere, maybe in a factory, maybe cleaning the streets, but you weren't expected to go to university.
Got it.
And because of that, I didn't. I didn't go to university. I started in college, got halfway through, and really didn't get on with academia too well. I was quite overwhelmed by it all. But
Mm.
my parents were supportive. Got I lived with both my parents and a sister, and everybody was fairly supportive, fairly laid back. And because of that, you were just expected, don't worry about education, just go and get a job. Everything will be okay. So I'm 17 years old, finished my education now, as far as I'm concerned, and just got the first job that I could find working in this warehouse office answering the phone. And I I was in at the deep end into adult life. I felt far too young to be getting a job and just hoped for the best. We have a
Yeah.
phrase in the UK of just it means to make it up as you go along, really, and that's blagging it. You just
Mm.
blag it. Don't worry, just blag it, mate. It'll be okay. So I blagged it and didn't really know what I wanted to do. And it, as a and this goes into some of the other things you wanted to talk about. It's strange how it all comes round. As a
Mm.
young child, I didn't know I was going to be interested in mental health. That I didn't know that would interest me at all. What I wanted to do, I wanted to be an actor. I wanted to be on the
Oh wow.
stage. You know, maybe a stand-up comedian, possibly, but
Okay.
certainly an actor where somebody else has written the words. It's been scripted by somebody else, and if I've got to perform it, it's not my words I'm performing. It's not
Right.
me you're going to judge. It's them. So I wanted to be an actor,
Okay.
but that takes a lot of confidence. Didn't have it. So thought, okay, maybe I'll be a radio DJ. That interested me. So I thought I'll get involved in that. And as when I was 16, still at school, I joined the local hospital radio station, which is the only place you can really get some experience if you're
Okay.
interested in radio, is hospital radio. And the first thing they did is put me on the wards. Go and chat to people. Go and talk to people. Go and find
On the
out what sort of
street.
music they liked. So there I was on the wards, age 16, chatting to all these old folk about music from the 1950s and things like that. And I was learning all about what it's like to be a 70-year-old woman. It was really quite interesting. But these people were in pain, you know, they were in hospital. But me sitting down and
Mm.
talking to them, it helped distract them from their pain. I found that if they called a nurse caller, this is how I think I really got involved in mental health. They'd call the nurse because they were in a bit of pain. I'd go and sit down next to them because I'd noticed they'd they'd press the button, but I knew full well there's not going to be a nurse coming for at least 5 minutes because I look at the time and go, they're on a handover. They're having a cigarette because they
Mm,
did in those days on the
right.
ward. The door was shut, but those nurses are having a cigarette. I thought I'll go and sit with this old lady and see what's going on before the nurses come, and we just chat, just talked. Hello again, Ethel. I noticed you pulled you pressed the button there for the nurse there. What's going on? How are you doing? Oh, I'm just struggling a little bit. Oh, okay, that's fine. So we sit and chat. Tell me again
Yeah.
about that granddaughter you were telling me about, what she was doing at school last week. Oh, yes, she was in this pantomime. It was lovely. So she's chatting away. I'm distracting her from the pain in her leg or whatever. And
Hmm.
I get up to just before I get up to go, she's cancelled the nurse caller because she's feeling a bit better. And then I'd wander away, and then I was here, and then she'd press the button again because she'd concentrated on the pain again. And
Right.
I think
Right.
that did plant a seed in my mind that, given the right circumstances, we can even take pain away, physical pain, not just mental pain. That
Right.
intrigued me. And I think that did inspire me then later on to consider working in mental health, especially when I
Wow.
first trained, which was as a hypnotherapist. And I know exactly how that happened. That was bizarre. I This was the year 2000. I just moved
Mm,
house, and we got the internet plugged in. I thought, right, I'm gonna have a play on the internet, like you do in those days. I'm just going to ask a question to Yahoo. What shall I ask? And I asked, how does hypnosis work? I was bored. How does hypnosis work? And it came up with these articles and people talking about the science behind it and the state versus non-state. Is it real? Is it just a series of expectations? It's quite interesting. But then for
hmm.
a week, all I get is adverts down the side of my Yahoo stream for colleges teaching you how to be a hypnotherapist. And it rang a bell. It was like, oh wow, this ticks every single box. By this point, I'm 24, 23, 24.
Okay.
Ticks every single box. I've spent all my all my childhood wanting to work in something to do with audio, and then getting interested in people at the
Yeah.
same time. And then this college course pops up that says, you can train as a hypnotherapist if you like, and you can help people quit smoking, help people lose weight, help people with their nerves, with some anxiety issues, their phobias. This is a career for you if you want it. It's like bang, the bell rang. I was like, I've got to train in this. This is fascinating, and that led me further down the path of mental health, and then I became a psychotherapist a few years later with some extra training, and never looked back. Absolutely never looked back. And now I think I combine my life certainly combines all those original interests. I
Hmm.
work in amateur. I help run an amateur dramatics company. I have a podcast, so I'm both an actor and not a DJ because I don't work with music, but I do play around with audio. I'm playing around
Right.
with
Right.
all this stuff, so I'm getting all those needs met, and at the same time helping people, which is the box I deep down
Beautiful.
desperate to tick. So
Yes.
things have fell together nicely now. They really have.
No, that's awesome how that happens though. And that was really interesting the way you told that story. Like starting from you seemingly just trying to help someone out and then it piqued your curiosity and then, you wanting to do some searching on your own and then getting, advertisements doing what they do
Yeah.
to follow up with you basically on what you're looking at.
Yeah, all the
I think
complaints that
that's
people
really
might
amazing.
have about targeted adverts and
Yeah.
and not accept and rejecting cookies and things like that. And he's like, actually, maybe sometimes we do want to be targeted
Could
with
be
the right
beneficial.
stuff. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, stuff like you said, stuff that you were already interested in, stuff that you were already looking at.
yeah,
And yeah, that gave you more information to want to pursue, traditional study in
yeah.
that field, which is awesome. I think that, especially when it comes to the field, right? I'm always curious genuinely how we get started because for so many of us, we have all these different stories of why we choose to do this type of work. And then, which we'll get into in a little bit, but not even considering the fact that we're men. And we know that traditionally those are not typical career paths, we would say, that men would
Mm,
choose. Like even the fact that you said that you wanted to listen, right? You wanted to be a good listener. You wanted to support this person. You helped alleviate her pain for a period of time where you were physically present, and
yeah.
and that motivated you.
I'm remembering being 15, and back in those days, I don't know whether it happens anymore. I don't think it happened to my son, who's a little older than that. When he was 15, this didn't happen, I'm sure. We used to get careers advisors coming to the school, and they'd look at your predicted grades, and they go, right, let's
Mm.
see if we can match you up with a career.
Right,
They'd
right.
already, this was a working class town. They'd already made their mind up beforehand what these
Okay.
pupils were going to be like. So when this woman sat in front of me and said, so let's have a look here, you're doing reasonably well in languages, you're doing okay in sciences, is there anything in particular that you're interested in? And I said, well, actually, yeah, I want to work. I'd love to be an actor. I'd love to figure out how to make that happen. She just went, no. It's just no, no, not going to do that. Think realistically. What else
Yeah.
do you want to do? I said, well, maybe I'd like to work in radio. I think radio would be really interesting. I love people. I love words.
Hmm.
Yeah, again, it's just a dream. What else? Just discount that. Don't even bother. What do you want? What else do you want to do? And I do remember saying, I don't really know where this came from, but I said I'm quite interested in social work. I
Mm.
think even at that age 15, I was interested in helping people. And she said, no. She said, don't even bother. Don't do that. It's a
Wow.
thankless job. Nobody enjoys that job. You'll have no satisfaction. It's a thankless job. Everybody hates social workers. You'll get nothing but trouble. So let's have a look again. So you're doing quite well in science. You're doing well in languages. So we're looking at something to do with science and languages, aren't we? She'd already made her mind up before she'd even walked into the room what
Yeah.
she thought I was going to do. And I think those expectations that other people have, they can
Yes.
really influence if you're not, because it did influence me. I then had nothing to do with acting, radio. Well, I did have a bit to do with radio because I joined the hospital radio service. I wasn't going to say no, but I did kind of walk away from the idea of being a social worker. She kicked it out of me with just a handful of
Man,
words. That's a real shame.
it
Although,
is.
right place at the right time, maybe. But here's me saying it didn't do me any harm in the end because I was in my mid 20s when I was training.
Right.
So that's still quite young to be a therapist. I meet lots of people training now; they're in their 40s or 50s,
Right.
and maybe I did need to be older. Either way, these are the cards I was dealt, and I've took every opportunity to be who I want to be congruent with my values.
Yes. See, that's so important what you're saying though. Like I want to emphasize that point because when you were first starting to describe that, you were reminding me in the States, we do something similar. I'm not sure exactly how it is today in high school because I haven't been in high school in a little while. But when I was going through it, you had what they would call a career counselor. Sometimes it was the school counselor or the guidance counselor of that school that you went to, and they would bring in, people from different schools or other professionals from like trade schools, things that you do like an apprenticeship for that you don't necessarily go to college directly for. And you're right though, people definitively remember getting certain feedback even if you had a different idea in your mind of what you wanted to pursue and being steered away from that. To your
Yeah.
point though, and I actually would say I think that that is troubling because I'm not saying that we should be unrealistic, right? So let's say for example, because I used to be an advisor in higher education at university.
Mm.
Let's say for example you want to be a doctor or you want to be an engineer. If you want to be an engineer but you're weak in your math subjects and you have no desire to do that work, I'm not going to get good conscious suggest that you continue pursuing engineering because you have to get through so much of it because it's the foundation to build up and do the more difficult work.
Mm.
If you want to be a medical doctor, you have to have a strong foundation in the life sciences, your biologies, your chemistries, a fair amount of physics, and some math
Mm.
in anatomy. If you have no interest in really focusing on that area, you probably aren't going to get into med school. So I'm
Yeah.
not going to, in good conscience, advise that you continue, right? Because you might get really discouraged and just give up. I'd rather you find out what you really want, pursue that, than just walk away and do nothing, right?
Yeah.
That's very different than what you just said, though.
Mm.
Oh, I'm thinking about doing this. No, 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 no. You don't want to do that. That's a thankless job. Well, that's your perception. So you're impressing that upon me, which is not really fair. Even if you say it's thankless, okay. Some people say teaching's a thankless job, right? And we know, we'll talk about in a little bit. I know in America, mental health professionals aren't, unless you're maybe a psychiatrist, you're not necessarily as respected as some of our other peers in the health field, and we're not historically compensated as well as other health professionals are, even though we have to get graduate education to do the type of work that we do. You need at least a master's
Mm,
degree to practice independently.
mm.
So
Oh, wow. Okay.
yeah, so and that's in every state. So to not have those things and still be looked at in that particular way, I think that's very unfair to put that impress that upon a young person who may genuinely be interested. So that's one thing I definitely try to tackle on this platform is helping people to see like, hey, you can live comfortably doing this type of work. You can have impact. You can live with purpose. I think those are important values. I mean, they're certainly important to me, and I think
Mm,
they would resonate with other people, to not discourage them very early on from pursuing this type of work, because you and I both know there's not enough young men and then men that even go into this field. So to be discouraged like such from such a young age, I think is really not benefiting us as a society, because we're really just making it a stay essentially a female led and female dominated field. So it can kind of discourage men from seeking out help. But do you think there's any truth to that?
Oh, it certainly is the case over here as well. The 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 if you go onto the therapy registers, and there's 3 or 4 in the UK that are popular by the different sort of registering bodies. You put in your postcode, your zip code, click search. Let's see how many people are in my area. It is just ah, it's like starting to get better, but it's still a page of white women, white woman, white woman, white woman, white woman, white woman, boom, 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 boom. And
Right.
yeah, you're gonna get the occasional you're gonna get the occasional black man. It's pretty rare, really is rare over here. And yet there's
Hmm.
so many black men need therapy. And I know that I'm preaching from a place of, oh, it's all right for you. You're a another middle-aged white man, aren't you? Preaching to us about how things need to be different. Oh, yeah, I can't help that. But we need to have these conversations so that
Yes,
whether
sir.
it's no matter, so everybody is represented, because people
Yes.
do want their therapist to be on at some element the same level as them. We want our therapist to know what it's like to be us. And if
Right.
we are upper class, upper middle class,
That's a big one.
yep, those people are going to want to go. Those that demographic is going to want to go to therapy as well. But the the biggest need for therapy is in people that are struggling financially. And the irony is, those people can't afford to go and see a private therapist. So
Correct.
we are banging our head against a wall. We really are. There's a few therapists that do pro bono work, and there's help within the NHS over here, but the waiting list is a year
Yeah.
just for an assessment. And
Yeah.
even some private therapists who are busy, even they have a waiting list that's a year long. But there are people that are sitting waiting for the phone to ring, and maybe they need to do a little bit more. They need to come on people's podcasts and promote themselves a little bit, maybe.
I could definitely
Because
see. I could see the value in that for sure.
yeah, I'm doing a presentation to one of our registering bodies over here in a couple of weeks' time, and it's just I don't know how many. I think there's probably about 200 delegates. It's quite a small conference.
Mm.
They've asked me to go along and to talk about what it's like to be a podcaster. Well, I will do, but what I want to do is try and make as many people in that room comfortable with putting themselves out there and saying, hello, this is who I am and this is what I do. And if somebody relates to them in some way because they've heard them, whether it's guesting on somebody else's podcast, or they've heard them on their own, or just they've gone onto
Yeah.
their website looking for a therapist, and there's somebody there with a whether it's a video clip or an audio clip, they can see them, or at least they can hear them and go, oh,
Mm.
okay. They've got an accent that's a bit like mine, or I can relate to them. I like what they say. It's not just the
Right.
same standard about me page. On if you go on Psychology Today or on these other things, everybody's
Yes.
everybody's got the same. It's like the
Everybody.
same bio.
Everybody covers everything to a certain degree. Like no
Yeah.
level of
Tick tick tick
speciality.
tick tick. It's
Right.
just tick tick
Check
tick.
every box. No. No.
Starting at anxiety, working all the way down tick tick. Oh, you specialize in
Right.
trauma, do you? Well, you've ticked the
Yeah.
box.
Right, right. No, no. Wait, listen, I have to touch on what you just said because that's so important. This is so important what you just said. Number one, representation.
Mm.
right? Could not agree with you more. I always like to be clear on this platform, and anytime I'm talking to anybody, I am never trying to be exclusionary, to say I don't like that we have women in the field, or I don't like our white brothers and sisters like yourself that help do this work, right?
Yeah.
Never going to hear that from me. But I do believe and agree with exactly what you said. It is great to have people who can have certain fundamental understandings. Not that we're all the same. No particular group is a monolith. No white people,
Mm.
black people, Asians, Latinos, anybody. None of us are monoliths. But there are certain common lived experiences that in many cases we share, that it helps to facilitate, to me, that rapport building a little bit faster,
Yeah.
because you understand, you're like, oh, I don't have to explain to some of the challenges that I may have to deal with in my day-to-day life. You seem like you sort of get it. So we
Mm.
can jump in a little bit faster into why am I here, which makes me feel good because I'm starting to feel heard, right? I'm feeling a bit more reassured. So I think
Yeah.
that helps out tremendously in that sphere, especially when you're talking about, again, when me and you were talking, especially, and we're talking about men, and we know how resistant they are already, and we are, to going out and getting that help. To touch on your point about the videos,
Mm.
and I'm not even exaggerating, Richard. Literally yesterday, I went back and I was updating my website, and I put in more of my video content. I have some of them on there, but I put more on my,
Mm.
like, immediately on my homepage, exactly to the point that you were mentioning. What differentiates you from other people? How do people see you? How do they get to hear you before they just read through all your stuff? So
Yeah.
I really want to echo that point. Um, I think that's so important. And for me and you, obviously, we're a little different because we already do the type of work.
Yeah.
For providers out there, if you're interested in trying to not only like recruit more people to get into your clinical practice or to seek out help, we all got to get more comfortable with putting ourselves out there, because there's no way that more people are going to resonate and recognize us if they don't get to hear us, probably before we get to meet. Because as Richard was talking about, a lot of times the information is all uniformly the same. It's hard to differentiate and separate what makes you different from this person. But if I get to listen to you and I get to watch you for a little while, I can say, you know what? This guy really has a good grasp on some of the things I'm struggling with. I need to reach out to him. And I think that that would benefit us more, to learn to get comfortable in this space, to not only record ourselves, but to say things and discuss and describe things that we have a lot of experience in. Not that we're going to reach everybody, but the ones that need help in that area, I think they
Mm.
certainly would be more encouraged to seek us out.
Oh yeah. I think having a podcast, which I've had for well, it's 2010, so it's been well, it was late 2010 or middle 2010. So it's been
Almost
12
12 years.
years. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's been 12 years of podcasting. And if somebody's been listening to me, I mean, genuinely, sometimes I'll have somebody contact me for therapy. It's not happened to me for a little while because I've had to say I can't take on any new patients at the minute, any new clients right now because
Right.
I'm too busy. But sometimes somebody will come onto my diary. They were listening to me from day one back in 2010. When that happened to me recently, a year or so ago, they were sessions ahead already, just
Mm.
because we'd built a relationship. It was a one side. I didn't know we'd built a relationship
Sure. Sure.
because I built it without realizing. So she knew me. She knew what my interests were. She knew what I was passionate about. She knew what I was enthusiastic about. She knew that I understood certain things, even though she doesn't really know me yet because we've
Right.
hardly got to know each other. It felt to her that we had a connection, and that is, I mean, that's the equivalent of maybe 10 sessions. I don't know
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
when I had therapy, because whether you need it or not, when you become a therapist, before you qualify, you're not allowed to qualify until you've had, over here it's 48, was it 50? No, it's 50 sessions, 50 therapy sessions. Well,
Oh, wow. Okay.
personal therapy, you've got to have 50 before they'll qualify you.
Okay.
And a lot of people just go to it because, well, I'm supposed to go. And it wasn't probably until, well, no, maybe I was a maybe I was maybe I was worse than most, but it was actually, for me, it was probably about 18 months in of fortnightly therapy before I had to put my hand in the air and go, yeah, I'm being me now. I'm actually being authentic. I'm not just being, I'm not wearing, this isn't a persona now. I'm actually being
Right.
honest and I'm being myself, and we can start doing some serious work now. That took
There we
18
go.
months. And
Listen, that's important though.
yeah, and I've had clients, and I've told that story to clients, and because they've been in, I can see they're in a similar position
Hmm.
where they don't feel safe to be themselves for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And if we're not careful, it can
Sir.
turn into years. It really could.
Yes. No, you're
They just
you're you're you're
play
so right.
a character. They think, well, this is who I've been told I've got to go to therapy, and I'm told this is going to help me. I'll be good. I'll be a good client. I'll be a good patient for them. I'll be good for
Hmm.
them. And they just say what we think
What they
they
think we want
what
to
they
hear.
think we want to hear. Yeah. So
Mm.
no, I want you to be authentic. I want to know all about you. That can take, for
Yes.
some people, if we don't create a good relationship with the therapist, it might not ever happen,
Yes.
ever, because we've
Right.
chosen the wrong therapist, because we don't click with them, because we didn't realize at session 5, yeah, they don't get me, and gone,
Oh
actually,
yeah.
thanks very much, but I'm not going to rebook for next time. I'm just going to have a bit of a break and see how I get on. That's all it needs to be. We don't even need to say, you know what? I don't think this is working between us. Can you
Right.
recommend another therapist, please? I mean, that
Right.
would be great. And I think every therapist should be okay with hearing that. If somebody said
Yes.
that to me, I'm like, great. That's brilliant. Because now you know more about what you need and what you want. Let's
Spot
find you.
on.
Let's help. Let's see if I can help you find you a therapist who you can really click with. I'm sorry that can't be me, but it's really important that you find the right therapist for you. Let's see what we can do. We need to be okay with that as therapists. And that's
Yes.
not a rejection, that's in the client's interests. And if you don't have those 50 sessions of therapy first, maybe you're not able to do that as a therapist.
No, absolutely. And it's funny, Richard. It's so funny you said that. When I was in grad school, I mean, number one, they don't require us to do it, but they strongly encourage us throughout school to go. I had been
Mm,
going throughout my life, but I went again like twice. I went to the same institution for undergrad and graduate school. So I went both in undergrad and graduate school. I went to therapy. But what was interesting, I was going to bring up to your point. One of my professors said this, and it's always stuck in my head ever since I first started that program. He's the director of that program. He said, every client is not for every therapist. And remember that. And so
mm,
anytime when I had people reach out to me, right, even to this day, if I don't feel confident that I can help them in the issue that they are presenting with, then I'm going to try to help them find somebody else or encourage them to find somebody else because I want them not only to just connect.
mm,
Connections is very important, right? We know that. Like you just made that point very beautifully. If we don't feel a strong connection, they're not going to be their most authentic and vulnerable self. So we can do the real work. So I 100% agree. We have to have that. But at the same time, also being qualified to help them in the areas of need, right?
yeah.
So that they understand what they need and that I feel comfortable enough that I've done that before, or that I'm telling you I'm not as comfortable or I'm as qualified to do that, and you're okay with like working with me as we work on it together, right? Being very
Mm,
transparent. But the point that you were mentioning about everybody's not for everyone, to me, that's what the consultation process is for. Is me giving you that or me listening to you about what you're looking to address, what you're looking to work on, me giving you my spiel of sort of how I do it and a little bit about myself and seeing if we line up. And then even once that happens, if we agree, as you said, I could be 3 to 5 sessions in and say, you know what? I don't feel the same connection, or I feel that I'm being extremely resistant. I don't know if you see that. And I don't want to waste your time. Like I want to
mm,
make sure that I'm getting the most out of this and I don't feel like I am. And I absolutely agree with you. I believe as therapists, we have to be comfortable with that because you said the most important thing at the end of that statement. It's about the client. It's never about us. And if we think it's
mm,
about us, then we probably need to be doing our own work because they're seeking us out for help, not to personally attack us or to make us feel bad or anything like that. They just want to get the help. So
yeah.
I agree with you, and I want to echo that same point. If you're out there and somebody, I don't even want to say rejects you because, like you said, it's not about rejection. They just don't feel the level of connection needed to do the work, right?
Mm,
That's okay. That we have to be willing to pivot, and I hope that we would support and help them while they're trying to find somebody else. as they're continuing the journey, because that means they still
Yeah.
need that help, right? So I think that those points are extremely valid and very important for all of us to be mindful of. And then for the clients out there, as you said as well, to not be afraid to verbalize that,
Mm.
right? We're trying to create this warm, inviting environment. So if you don't feel like you can be honest, like that's not a good sign of our
Yeah.
relationship. If you don't even feel like you can tell me, I don't know, this is working right now.
Yeah. And if you do say that and the therapist is angry about that,
Yeah.
well, then now you've got your answer. You know that that wasn't probably the right therapist for you or
No, not at all.
potentially anybody.
No,
And
absolutely agree.
and I get that that's difficult for therapists, especially if they're new. They've been,
Yeah.
they spent 3 or 4 years training. Right, I'm going into private practice now. I'm not going into agency work, or maybe they've been working in an agency for a couple of years, and now I'm going to jump into private practice. This is scary. I'm running a business now. I've got to try and get customers, not clients. And then what that customer says they don't want to spend any more money with you. You've got to be okay with not seeing that client, that patient as a service user, as a
Yes.
customer. They're a person. There's a
Hmm.
reason why. I mean, there was a time when counseling was called um, client centered for a little
Yes.
while, and it didn't really catch on. And it's been person centered for decades now,
Yeah.
70s, probably maybe it was only client centered for about 10 years before they went, yeah, thanks, but they're not just clients, they're people. Let's have
Hmm.
person centered work. And that's
Right.
where we are still all these years later, recognizing the foundations to therapy, whether we're doing cognitive therapy, behavioral therapy, solution focused therapy, or
Hmm.
just sort of combination of all of those all at once, or we're doing
Right.
psychodynamic stuff. Everything still relies on those same foundations, which
Yes, sir.
is that is a person there. That is a real human being. Get that connection right. And it doesn't matter whether you're going to be solution focused or psychodynamic. You're probably going to get the same, to a degree, you're probably going to get the same results because it's the connection that the two of you have that is the most important. And studies have shown that for like 40 years. We've
Yes.
seen that
No, no, that
with,
and we know that too. To just to echo your point real quick, we know that's true. Those of us like on both sides, especially like you and me, right? We've both said that we've gone to therapy. We know the difference between when you sit down and you genuinely want to express yourself versus if you're like, I'm gonna be a little more reserved. I'm gonna wait and see like how they respond. We know that difference.
yeah,
So we would expect nothing less for a client to come into our space and that we're providing that. But then if we don't feel that connection though, it's okay to step away from that. It means there could be somebody else out there that you might resonate with more. And at the end of the day,
yeah,
it's about you. So
yeah.
I don't know. I think that that's important. I love that you made that point because I think sometimes, again, I get a lot of first timers, especially when you talk about people of color and men, especially. So they don't necessarily know the standards and practices like how do you do this. So
Mm,
I always really try to take my time and be thorough, like explain a lot of the basic stuff that somebody else would be like, yeah, I understand. I try to take my time because I know that they haven't gone through that experience before. And I will say this because I don't know how many first timers you may get. Um, I always keep in the back of my mind, not that it is a service, but that even when we go through so much difficult information and experiences that we're trying to learn from and process, that I'm hoping you would genuinely say that you have a favorable outcome. Not a perfect outcome, not that everything went exactly the way you want it, but generally you would say it was favorable. And the reason why I want you as the client in that scenario to be encouraged in the future to go seek out help again. Not necessarily from me, from
mhm.
anybody that you not like you don't turn into one of those people who are sort of cynical about it. Oh, therapy doesn't work. Man, I had this guy. He seemed like he couldn't be bothered. He wasn't paying attention. He was just like really. I saw him checking this watch the whole time, just checking the clock. And as soon as it hit time, he was like ready to get me out of there. I never want that to be the impression,
Yeah,
because then they're not going to come back. But even more so, they might, as you were touching on earlier about your college counselor who was talking to you about careers, they might discourage other people,
yeah.
right? Somebody else might be like on the fence. Does therapy work? Oh, no, 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 no. It absolutely does not work. Do not waste your time.
Ugh.
now we lost somebody else who probably is going to go through more unnecessary hardship simply because somebody else who didn't have a favorable experience is speaking ill of the process. Like
Mm.
I always think about that when I get somebody new, especially. I don't know if you had that experience.
Oh, yeah. I've heard people talk about that. Definitely, especially when I used to specialize. I mean, I still do specialize in hypnosis. If people ask for it, then yeah, we'll have a bit of a cheesy session where they lie down and we speak quietly and relax, and we'll do all that sort of stuff, and it's
Right.
lovely. And also, it's not just therapeutic from a relaxation perspective. It's also, you know, quite exciting as well, and it can wake the brain up a little bit and help therapy along for a lot of people.
Mm.
But if you do get cynical people, there is no grey area. It's just yes or no, black or white. It's
Yes.
it's it's just no. There's no oh wait. They don't say it didn't. Therapy didn't work for me. They'll just say no, therapy didn't work. Therapy doesn't
Right.
work. Hypnosis
Right.
doesn't help. Rather than say, well, hypnotherapy didn't help me in on that day in that
Right.
time. There's so much more that can be done if we talk properly. What I was thinking about then is some of the problems that we can have, like we were saying, that therapists, they're ticking the boxes on
Hmm.
the bio for the registering body. Yes, I work with anxiety. Yes, tick 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 tick, all the way down through to trauma, tick. And that's a bugbear of mine. That if somebody hasn't done extra training in trauma work, then they might just, if they're not careful, give somebody the same "it's good to talk" therapy when they've got a real severe traumatic experience, PTSD
Right.
potentially going
Right.
on. And sometimes it isn't good to talk, or it's good to talk a little bit, but now you've been taught already some emotional regulation skills, and now you can calm down. And we'll talk about it again
Hmm.
a bit later. But let's have a distraction. Let's just talk about something else for a bit. Let you ground yourself, which we do with trauma work. If somebody's been told, no, it's good to talk. I'm going to go to a therapist and I'm going to talk about what happened to me when I was 8 uh, because I've been told it's good to talk.
Hmm.
And they go from being 9 out of 10 anxious for a month. They have one session of therapy where they're told it's good to talk, and now they're at 10 out of 10. They've never felt worse for a month, and it ruins their life because
Hmm.
they were told it's good to talk. Go to a therapist and talk about what happened to you. It'll make you feel better. Yeah, it'll make you feel better if you weren't traumatized, if you don't have, great severe trauma reactivity. And
Right.
that's a bit of an issue that people will then walk away and go, no, therapy didn't help me
Hmm.
because they went to the wrong therapist, or the therapist pushed them too far too soon because they didn't know what they were doing, or they didn't recognize how traumatized the client was.
Right.
I hear those stories a lot where somebody will say, look, it is good to talk, but you need to find a different therapist. I listen to this guy's podcast, contact him, and they'll come in and sit down and go, I'm scared to talk because the last time I saw a therapist, it made me worse, not better. I'm like, well,
Right.
thanks for
Right.
letting me know.
No, absolutely. Like you're trying to learn how to overcome that. I agree. And to make that point, to further build on your point, we need to always know our limits. That's what I was saying earlier about if it's an area I'm not specialized in, excuse me, I will make sure I say that. Like if you
Mhm.
still want to work with me as I'm trying to learn how to deal with that with you, if I'm open to that, I'll present that. If not, I will immediately say like, I think you're better off working with somebody who specializes in that area. Like I remember I had somebody, I want to say it was maybe a year and a half ago, who reached out, who was going through the process of transitioning,
Mm.
and they had to, I don't remember all the steps in all honesty because that's not my area of expertise, but I know like you have to get some signed letters from therapists who can speak to like the experience that you're going through, and they have to also work with a psychiatrist for a specific period of time,
Same
and
over
basically
here.
get
Yeah.
get, get those signed off from everybody.
Yeah.
And I was listening to them. I believe they were Latino, but they were basically saying like, oh, I think it could help because you have some commonalities with me. But I said very upfront, I was like, listen, I don't have any experience in this area. Like I'm not really comfortable trying to help you in this particular time because we're not just talking about exploring the genesis of where that might come from for you, like I would be comfortable talking about that. You are very well along in the process, and you're asking me to sort of help sign off on you finishing your
Mm,
journey. Like I don't feel comfortable doing that because I've never done that before.
mm.
And I very quickly referred them to a few others um, online because I just
Yeah,
thought that that was in the best due diligence and interest of the client.
we've got to know where our scope of competence is. And if we're
Yes.
working outside of our scope of competence, well, then that's incompetence. We're
Yeah.
being incompetent. Don't do that.
No, I agree. I'm like, I think we, again, to your point about checking the boxes, I'm like, yeah, there's a fair amount of things that a lot of us can generally work on. But I do think there is an importance of specializing. Like, for
Yeah.
example, I work with a lot of people with racial issues, particularly in the United States, from Black and Brown communities. I obviously work a lot with men. That's why you're here, because we know based on what we've seen that not only is there a lack of engagement and encouragement for those men to come in, but we have so many suppressed and repressed issues because we just get taught for so long to not ever talk about them.
Yeah.
So I like to talk about them as well, and then relationships also, because I'm a father, I co-parent, so I talk a lot about co-parenting, parenting in general, trying to manage relationships, especially for young men seeking out relationships with young women. And so those are like the areas that I like to focus on the most because I feel the most confident and competent in those areas,
Mm.
even though I would touch some other things. But if somebody came to me, like you said, and they're like, man, I'm dealing with severe PTSD, if I get the impression that you need to be maybe inpatient because seeing me outpatient once a week is not going to cut it, I'm going to say that because
Mm.
it's not about me, right? It's about you. I want you to get the best outcome. I'll be fine. I'm not presenting with this issue. You are.
Yeah.
So I think we need to be, so I appreciate you making that point. As therapists, we need to understand our limits unless we're
Mm.
going to train and specialize in those other areas. Understand that you can only go with them probably so far, or perhaps you maybe shouldn't even really start the journey with them. You should refer them to a more appropriate person to lead them down that path.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I can't agree with you more. I see that a lot, and I just don't want us to hurt the potential to hurt clients and end up discouraging them from seeking out help and then discouraging somebody else. Like that's the really concerning part that I worry is them shutting
Mm.
somebody else down. It's like, oh, man, that person probably could have addressed that a little more quickly, but they walked away from like for 5 years because
Mm.
this one person told them, oh, that's a bunch of crap. Don't waste your time. So
What I tend to do, if somebody contacts me, maybe a client will say, "Can we find a therapist for my sister or something like that?" We'll
mhm,
have a look through the registers and we'll pick out maybe 10 therapists. And I'll say, "Look, here's 10 therapists. I've discounted some already, but here's 10.
mhm,
Have a look through them. See, out of maybe there's five, six, seven, maybe you can speak to all of them, but speak to as many as you can. Spend 10 minutes on the phone to them, just having a chat first and ask them
right,
these questions that are on your mind. Maybe what they're thinking about is, um, can you tell me how you work with trauma? I have trauma. Can you tell me how you work with that? Or
there you go.
I'm I no matter what, I have attachment insecurities. Can you tell me how you work with that? Whatever it is that's your issue is, ask the therapist on the phone, how would you work with that? What would the treatment likely be? And if they go, oh, I don't know, we'll just sort of make it up as we go along. I suppose I won't know until I meet you. If they don't have some clue about how they would structure their therapy sessions with somebody, yeah, it's a bit of a cross next to them rather than a tick. You go, well, thank you very much. You move on to the next one. You speak to them all. Maybe you have a
Mhm,
session, just one session. Yes, it's expensive, and you're having to have another. You, you're having to have more therapy than you think you need, but you're still going to get something out of each of those
oh
initial
yeah,
sessions, surely. So, and in doing so, you also figure out, I prefer this style of therapy or this
right,
particular therapist.
mhm,
And if that's the case, then you've saved yourself 10 sessions already from finding the right therapist in the first place. But
yeah,
we've got to take the time to do it and not just assume, look, I want to see somebody. It doesn't matter who they are because they're all going to do the same thing anyway. Because therapy is therapy, isn't it? It's not.
right. No, no. No, and even to that point, no, it's a very specialized experience. And to your point, you really want to have somebody that you're gonna feel comfortable right off the bat to be fairly vulnerable with. Now, I have no delusions
Mm,
that building trust takes time, and nobody's going to come to you typically. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but typically they're not going to come and pour their soul out to you right off the bat. You have to earn that.
mm,
But I would say that if you remember, like if you're a potential client, right? If you remember that I'm trying to go on a journey with somebody, meaning this is not probably I see you 5 or 6 times and that's it. Maybe you do. Maybe you have a very much a lighter issue
mm,
that doesn't require that, right? I don't typically deal with that. I'm dealing with people, we're probably talking at least several months, more than likely. Because I'm going to commit to essentially, not that we say that right off the bat that we're going to commit to that much time, but if we understand
mm,
it's going to be a considerable amount of time, we're going to work together. I want to take my time in the beginning to get it as right as I can with someone. Because if I rush that process and I've been going on this journey for 3 to 5 months or maybe longer with you, I think that ultimately I could be doing myself a disservice
mm,
by just rushing through that, getting with somebody and probably not getting the type of results that I would like. Or maybe it's just taking way longer because I'm more hesitant, like I don't want to speak up as much as I probably would if I had somebody that I did feel a stronger connection to be vulnerable. So I think it's important to think about the journey, like the amount of time you're talking about, or maybe how many years, maybe you're trying to unpack.
mm.
If you're trying to unpack decades, like we're probably not going to do that in a week or a month or 2 months. So
Four
we're
sessions
we're
of
making
CBT, you know.
right, like we're probably making considerable investment of time into each other. And I always talk about that in consults, but
Mm,
for those out there that don't know, I think it's important everything that you just said. It's nothing wrong with contacting several therapists to try to get that connection with someone, and understand you're probably committing to a pretty extensive journey with them. So you want to take the time to get it right with them. You don't want to rush that process and just hurry up and get through it, because you might not get the best outcomes that you could have if you just
mm,
took a little more time in the beginning.
yeah.
I think that that's important. I do want to ask you, since we've basically been talking about it the whole time,
Mhm.
what has your experience being a man in the field? Obviously, again, we're minorities within this field.
Mm.
What has your experience been like over there, being a male therapist?
We we do tend to find that it's the same over here than it is in most cultures, that it's women that are attracted into the profession, and that's part of our culture, that women are
Mm,
cultured to be more caring, and
right.
men seem to be in a culture that is more, dare I say it, toxic. I think is probably fair to say. There is an element of toxicity to being a man. I mean, it's getting better. The
Mm,
next generation of boys becoming men, I think, are going to be a little bit more in touch with how they feel, and it's not just going to
yeah.
be about aggression. Uh, Certainly, I've noticed that adult men coming into me for therapy, because men are saying, "Oh, I didn't want to go and see a woman about this."
Right.
It-
Right.
because of that, they're trying to find a male therapist, and there are so few of them. It's probably like it's a fifth, maybe a sixth. I think for every six women therapists, there's probably one man on the registers. So it's, if you want a male therapist, it is pretty hard, because likely they've probably not got any space, because they're all full of the diaries are already full of men needing male therapists. But they are
Right.
they are coming in saying, aged 50, I've never explored how I feel before. I've only ever had two emotions on my list: anger
Mm,
and bravado. And that's it. They don't understand what it felt like to be rejected. They just felt angry. They didn't know what it felt
right.
to be belittled. They just felt angry. Or guilty. They just felt angry. And they're trying to figure that out in their 50s, when they've had a lifetime of only feeling angry. And if they feel good, yeah, then there's some bravado, there's some pride of look what they've achieved. Well, there's a
Right.
hell of a lot more going on to being a human. I don't find that necessarily the case with women when they come for therapy, but the men I certainly do. And I think the more male therapists there are, that not just actually no, not just therapists, but just the more men there are, that when they do sit round a table in a pub with their friends, that they do have a conversation that says, "So how you been?" And it's not just what have you achieved, what have you done. No,
Right.
how have you been? And over here, when somebody says, "How have you been?" the default is just to go, "Fine. Work's been
Same.
busy, family's good." And it's just it's lies usually. We can't always have been fine, and yet we go, "Fine. How are you?" Fine. Pint, pint. And they get a pint and they sit down and then they'll talk about football, you know.
And then we just keep it going. I gotta I want to throw something in there real quick because one of my clients says this a lot, and I always I laugh a little bit, but then I challenge him immediately. He'll use the term solid, like, "Hey, how are you doing today?" He's like, "I'm solid, everything's solid." And every
Hmm.
time I ask him, I was like, "What does that mean when you say that?" Like,
Mm,
I don't. Even if somebody said I'm fine, like, what do you mean by fine? What does good mean? I'm very big on like defining your terms. What does that actually mean when you say that? And then when you
yeah,
force them, when you throw it back to them, they're like, "Oh, uh, I mean, I guess I'm doing okay, but this, and this happened, and that was kind of a challenge, and I just struggle a little bit, but I mean, I guess I'm okay because I'm still here and I'm talking to you." Like, okay,
mm,
it gives a little more context, right, to your point, not just
yeah,
one word answer, two word answer. Let's move forward, but we're never allowing for ourselves to be more expressive,
mm.
right? Is that sort of where you're getting at there?
Absolutely. It's not in male culture to do that. Women will. They'll sit and cry with each other if they have to,
Absolutely.
and they'll support each other. Men just don't do that. Really don't. They wouldn't know how yet. And like I
Yeah,
say, I think it's going to get better with the next generation.
I agree.
But the idea that you could be sitting with a friend in a bar, and it's not because they've been drinking, but they've got something to talk about, and their eyes fill up with tears, and and rather than their friends go, "Whoa, I don't know what, how do we handle this?" Instead, they lean forward and go, It's all right. Tell us about it, mate. What's going on?" For them to go, "Oh God, right, okay," and they get upset, and they have a good cry.
Yeah.
The idea of men doing that is just unthinkable, absolutely unthinkable. And but why? We're both human, whether we're male or female. We're both human. We're both
Yes.
feeling something.
Yes.
It's so toxic to not admit that. And it is, I think, about vulnerability. There is that
Yes.
toxic masculinity that says, if I show you I'm vulnerable, well, that means I'm the weak one. Then you could dominate me. Uh,
Yeah. We get
Come
back
on,
to
we're not
power.
living
Get
in
back to
the
power.
we're not living in the Stone Age, you know? Grow up.
Agreed.
Come on, we
No,
can do this.
I'm with you, man. I'm with you. I believe that it starts with us, making that space feel comfortable. Like you said, having like a close support system that you feel like you can go to and you can talk to them about things that you're struggling with.
Mm,
And that we have to affirm each other and validate each other when we do choose to open up. What I usually say, because I agree with everything you said, like I believe that things can get better and that they will get better with the subsequent generations. What I do say, I think that makes it challenging for us and that I admire about women is the support
mm,
that they provide to each other. And I challenge a lot of us as men to observe them in the way that they behave. When one of them gets down and they sort of rally around them
yeah.
to like
Could be
insulate them,
complete
like provide the
strangers.
support. Right. You just see it and you're like, they need
Yeah.
help. Let me support. Instead of us, we just kind of take a step back and just observe that person fall apart, break down, what have you. I'm very big on environment. To me, the vast majority of the expressions that we have, the lived experiences that we have, shape our perception and our reality, which then can have a significant impact in the way that we choose to express ourselves to others.
Mm,
So to me, when I think about like why men are the way that we are, that's always a question that I'm constantly wrestling with. A lot of it in my experience, both personally and professionally, is the environments that we come up in, the expressions that are told to us very early on in our lives, when we cry, when we try to speak up, when we try to say things that are bothering us. And it can be in our family environment, it can be in our schooling environment, it could just be when we're walking around, that people tell you to stop, to shut it down, shut it up, keep it to yourself, don't be a woman, don't be a girl, right? All these
Yeah.
different phrases, man up, all these
Man
different
up.
phrases that they throw around, right? Specifically to us as a gender.
Yeah.
So to me, there's no shock, there's no surprise why we shut down. Why when we get in relationships and your significant other is like, we need to talk about this, and we do everything to avoid it,
Oh,
literally
yeah.
everything to avoid it. Because I think about it like incompetence. If you don't know how to do something, if I ask you to do something that an engineer would do, and you have no experience in doing that, what are you going to do? You're going to come with every excuse. You're going to run. You're going to avoid, because you don't want to have to show that you don't know what you're doing. You don't
Yeah.
want to, especially men, like you were saying earlier, like we don't want to have to demonstrate that. Like, I'm not sure. And when it comes to like emotional conversations, intelligence, the vocabulary, like you were discussing, a lot of times we don't have it
Mm.
because we get shut down for so long as young men. We're like, well, if my mom didn't care about what I thought or how I felt, if my dad didn't care about what I thought or how I felt, why would I think you would?
Mm.
What would I possibly think that you would care? You didn't even make me. If the people
Mm.
that made me didn't care about it, why would you? And it can foster this very negative cycle
Yeah.
where we just all sort of collectively agree, not that we do, but in our minds, collectively agree men aren't to talk. We don't talk. We just provide. We provide financial stability. We provide physical safety and security. And that's about it. If you want to
Mm.
cry, you go drink a beer, go cry in the corner. Nobody really cares or wants to hear it. And I've tried very hard to challenge that, because I think that we know in the big picture, you and I know, especially as practitioners, that's very destructive. That's why so many of us are averse to therapy. That's why so many of us lose our marriages, lose our relationships, destroy our relationships with our children, or we pass along those same cycles of dysfunction onto them that they later have to go deal with.
Mm.
It's because we don't deal with that. But we also need the women in our lives and the women in society and people as a whole to make men feel comfortable to be vulnerable,
Yeah.
right? Like, we got to do our part. We need to do our part. If we need therapy, we need to go,
Mm.
so that we learn the ways to express ourselves, so we're not being aggressive, hostile, fighting, punching, drinking, whatever. Like, we're not doing those things.
Mm.
But we need the people in our society around us to also help promote that type of dialogue genuinely. Don't just say you want us to be this way, and then when we try to do it, you shut us down again, because you're just perpetuating the cycle that we
Yeah.
already are struggling with. I don't know what you would say to that.
Yeah. We certainly see it that there is an expectation that men are going to be stoic and they don't feel
Yeah.
any other emotion other than anger. And that's it. If women are expecting that of their partners, and deep down those women still want their partners to be vulnerable, they want them to be human,
Mm-hmm.
and yet there's going to be some element of criticism when they are, some judgment, even if it's just a sideways look.
Right.
That's all it takes for the man to go, "Look, I knew it. I knew it." And they're just shut down.
Yes, sir.
And we need to make eye contact with people.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be there for them. Uh, it, I know we've got a long way to go, and all we do is scratch the surface with every generation. It's like you say, man hands on misery to man, as the old poem goes. It just gets
Right.
passed down more and more. And we're either struggling with the effects of generational trauma,
Mm-hmm.
or we're being the ones carrying the burden of trying to stop it. And either way, it's hard, no matter
Yes, sir.
what. But if we can sit down and listen to each other, even if somebody says, "I don't know what to say," it's okay to say, "I don't know what to say. I wish I knew what to say, but I'm here for you." That's it.
Mm-hmm.
That's all we need to say sometimes.
Right.
I can only imagine what you're going through and how you feel. I'm here for you. I'm here for you. That's
Hmm.
it. That's all people
Beautiful.
need. Um,
Absolutely.
that's a goal we should all aim for, I think.
I agree. I could not agree with you more. And that's why that's really what pushed me to want to have these conversations. Like the way I thought of it was if anybody was going to help be a part of this sea of change for us as a group, as a community, as a people, I thought it would need to start with therapists because at least we know a lot of the language
Mm,
to even utilize, like if you expect a young man or an older man or a middle-aged man to express himself and he's never been in therapy, like he don't even know where to start.
mm,
But if he's like, like you said earlier, I've been watching my man Richard on his podcast, and when he describes some of the lived experiences that he's had, that lines up a bit with what I've dealt with, and he called that generalized anxiety, or he called that generational trauma
mm,
that he experienced, or fear of abandonment that he was dealing with, and maybe that's a bit of what I got. I still need to go
mm,
work with somebody. I need to go talk to somebody, but I'm starting to get a sense of like, what are we really talking about here? Like, let's go beneath the surface, right? Not just
mm,
anger, but where's that anger coming from? What is it stemming from? I think it starts with people like you and me, because we have to demonstrate, number one, that it's okay to do that, but also, how do you develop that language
mm.
to even be confident enough to maybe start by talking with your partner, or start by talking with a friend or a trusted loved one, to start that process of practicing vulnerability with them, right? Because that's essentially what we need them to do in therapy. Like, I need you to be vulnerable. Like, we can't do
Mm.
any work if you're not going to be vulnerable here. We can't do any work. So I need you to be your most authentic and vulnerable self in here.
Especially if it revolves around abandonment or rejection sensitivity. Because if somebody's very sensitive to that, and a lot of people are,
Hmm.
and that is the cause of a lot of somebody's anger or anxiety, is they're going to leave me, or they
Hmm.
don't really like me, they don't really love me after all. If you get triggered every time your partner pulls a particular expression or says a particular phrase or does a particular thing, if
Right.
that triggers you, then you need to be able to say, and they need to be able to listen to that and not take it personally. There's nothing worse than somebody trying to be honest and open and vulnerable, and they're talking about how they feel, and then their
Hmm.
partner says, "Well, that's not my fault." I
Right.
didn't.
Immediately, I'm on defense.
Yeah, and that's not the point. That's not why I'm telling you that I feel rejected or abandoned. I'm not rejecting you. It's your fault. That is. It's your problem, not mine.
Oh, ooh.
Ah,
Oh, God.
and it just adds fuel to the fire. So
Yeah.
to be able to sit down and say, "Look, this is what's going on with me," and we might have to start that conversation with, "I know this is my thing, and this is not your fault. This is my stuff, and I'm dealing with it. But
Hmm.
when you turn your back on me like that, I feel really rejected. Maybe it reminds me of something from when I was a kid, I don't know, but I just feel small and insignificant, and I feel
Yes.
unloved, and it
Yes.
hurts. And I know you didn't mean that. That's not what you're saying when you turned away. When you turned away, what you were saying was, I can't be bothered with this. I'm too busy right now."
Hmm.
But what it felt like is that you're going to leave me. You don't love me. The marriage has been a lie, for example. I'm just
Hmm.
waiting for you to push me away and meet somebody else and just leave me. That's how it
Yeah.
feels. And if we can have those conversations, we can heal together.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Absolutely. That was so powerful what you just did. That role play you just did.
Mm,
And I love doing that as well.
mm,
Because yeah, that to me, that's the power of learning the language and how to express ourselves, right? Like if I was being a traditional man, perhaps in that scenario you just painted, I
mm.
would just yell, scream, slam the door, probably jump in my car and go speed off,
Yeah,
and be cursing the whole way I'm out. F this, F you, I don't care about this anymore. Gone.
yeah.
But the truth was probably more what you were saying. All from that one action. I just turned my back and I made you feel insignificant or worthless
Mm,
because maybe when I was growing up, that's what my father did to me. And so I don't feel like I have a lot of inherent value because of the way that I was mistreated pretty much my entire upbringing. And
Mm.
the last person I would ever want to feel that from is you, my partner,
Wow.
you know? Like that's
Yeah.
so powerful the way that you just said that. And I hope that may resonate with somebody.
Yeah.
But that's the
And I
power
know
of us learning how to express ourselves.
it is. I mean, clients will say to me, and they'll probably say this to you. "Oh, can you not just come with me, come home, and you say that to my wife?" "Uh, No,
Put
I can't do
can I
that.
can you jump in my pocket or I'll go hide in my
Yeah,
closet and we can have the
that's
conversation.
it.
You come out.
Yeah. And I'm afraid not. But let's talk about it here and train your brain that it's okay to use those words.
Yes,
And eventually it is. And even if it
absolutely.
does take a few failures, for want of a better word, we do fall over a bit, or we don't say it properly, and we don't get it out right, and we stumble over our words, and we make things worse, or we get angry, and then no, I can't do this myself right now, and we strop off.
Right.
If we have to do that 10 times before on the 11th, we go, actually, what I mean is this, and I and it's my thing. It's my problem, and I'm dealing with it. But I wonder if there are things that you can do that can help me, so that we
Yes.
can literally live happily ever after. Because that's what we signed up for when we got together.
Yes,
Because
sir.
that's what we both want, isn't it? Yes, it is.
Yeah.
That is what I want. I just want us to be happy. Well, we need to practice this. We need
Yeah.
to practice these conversations and not take things personally.
Yes. No, that's so important what you're saying there. And even I would add to that, this is one thing that I've always thought is helpful because sometimes, I know I can imagine you've probably been in a situation where you've had a client where they try to maybe express themselves to their partner, man or woman, and but they don't always communicate it the best.
Yeah.
Maybe they get lost in like getting caught up on tangents. So like somebody brings up something and they chase that, and they bring up something else and they chase that, and they lose sight of what they came to talk about. I'm a big believer in like scripting out. The same reason why I love journaling so much.
Mm,
It's like it's okay to script out what you need to say if you know that in the moment, some people don't always do, or it's not always as easy for them to formulate their thoughts and opinions in real time.
mm,
Right. Some people need time to collect themselves to really put together what they really mean. So I'm a big believer in that when you got to have difficult discussions, especially, right, to document and script out a bit of what you're trying to say. So that way, you stayed on target. So before we chase like 5 or 6 other issues that might end up coming up, let's resolve this one first because this one's going to create the biggest impact right now. The other ones are smaller. Not that they're not important, but they're smaller. Let's address this main one. And I want to be intentional about the vocabulary and the verbiage that I use because I don't want to offend you. So I took 2 days
mm,
to draft this because I was trying to be very sensitive to how you might interpret this, not because it's going to be foolproof, but tried my best. And I wanted to be very intentional in the way that I expressed to you how I felt. So that way I
mm,
get it out. Right. I usually make that as a suggestion, especially when I have like a couple, whether they're married or just dating. Because, a lot of times it's communication breakdowns or misinterpretations or a lot of assumptions being made. And I feel like that's a better way to try to help address that, especially those really uncomfortable conversations where you're already uncomfortable even having to sit down and start it or initiate it. But if you set a day and a time, we're going to talk here, we're going to discuss this particular issue, please
mm.
come prepared. And I've drafted what I wanted to say. It'll help ease a little bit of that discomfort to really get to the heart of, why we're talking about it.
Mm. Yeah,
It's
I
like a
think
it's like a general tip.
there's a phrase, isn't there? We need to talk.
Oh
And
yes.
if somebody was to say that phrase, I think for most people it must put the fear of God into them. Like,
Your
oh
heart your
no,
heart drops pretty much every time you're like,
yeah, we need to talk. Oh no, what have I done now? Uh oh.
yes.
Whereas I think if my wife was to say to me, "We need to talk," I think there'd be an element of that would pop in. But as a therapist, there'd be a lot of, "Oh, this is going to be good content. There's a lot we can work through here. This will be quite useful." Now, I've been a therapist for 20 years, so it's probably easy for me to deal with difficulties and people
Right.
talking about the problems they've got and letting them talk and not preparing an argument in my mind whilst they're talking and not even listening to what they're saying. I'm creating my defense ready to counter their argument. So no,
Oh yeah.
that's not efficient. That's not how you listen to somebody.
No.
Actually listen to what they say. And that's their lived experience. That's genuine. That's authentic. I think men need to learn that because women are better at talking, they will be talking. And us men, if we're not careful, we're not listening. We're
Oh yeah.
already just for how can I get out of this? How can I get out of this? How can I? Oh, I just want to walk away. Oh, I can't be doing with this. The
Hmm.
missus is nagging at me again. Oh, for goodness sake.
Thinking about
And
the escape plan.
yeah, and they'll go to the bar and go, yeah, the missus has got a right mood on her. Well, why? What did she say? Listen.
Right. What was the points that she brought up? That you know what's so important about what you're saying too, particularly when it comes to relationships. I like make this point a lot because I've had to, and also to remind myself. I talk so much about implicit bias, right?
Mhm.
I talk about in terms of our perception, and I'm like, number one, when you get in a relationship with somebody, you know that it's not just about how you see things, right? It can't be. Like you literally can't be in a relationship and think like she sees the world the way that I do. He sees the world the way that I do. Like you're already wrong if that's how you're starting this off. That's your premise. You're wrong. So don't do that. But then on top of that, when somebody like when you're talking about your wife or your partner, right, and this person is bringing their perception to me, I can't just dismiss it because you're my partner. Like if I'm just dismissing you, then I'm saying you don't have any valid points to ever bring up, right? Like oh no, she tried to say this, but I don't agree because I didn't see it that way. So I'm just gonna discard that. It's rubbish, right?
Yeah.
But that's not fair. Because what were we talking about earlier with men? We already feel like that when we want to bring something up when we're young, and it's just like, nope, nobody cares, shut it down. We already know how that plays out.
Mm.
It doesn't go well. It just teaches that person just to shut down or avoid, and that creates further problems that we're going to eventually have to deal with. But they're just going to keep stacking on top of each other.
Mm.
So I'm always talking about the fact that we have to be willing in those moments where we might be a little frustrated to try to look outside of ourselves. Just because she said that or he said that, it doesn't mean that they're right and it doesn't mean that you're right. It means I need to understand what are they trying to say to me. There may be some truth in that. I need to be able to bring and interject my point of view as well so we can find those points of understanding and compromise. Because it's not 100% what she wants, it's not 100% what you want, right? Because we all have to understand that we're not going to see each other's viewpoint 100% the same.
Mm.
But we need to always be open to trying to see it from their perspective.
Without
Like any
resentment.
relationship, right?
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
if you want to add on that.
No, I don't think there's much to add. You've succinctly hit the nail on the head with all of this, and people need to listen and learn from this. They really do. So I'm really glad that you've got this platform that you're ready to share all of what you know. And I think as therapists, we already know, even if you're just like a week out of training, you haven't
Hmm.
even you've hardly seen a client. You've just done some case studies and you're getting your hours in. You've got to do
Right.
100 hours in this country of seeing some clients for a bit. Even if that's all you've done, you've seen two clients, you
Right.
still know more about mental health and communication than probably 99.9% of the population. But because of imposter syndrome, the more that you know, the more you realize there's more to learn. The Dunning Kruger
Yes.
effect. It is what it
Absolutely.
is. And,
Yeah.
and that is the case, whether it's about mental health or theoretical physics or psychological theories, whatever it is, the more you know, the more you realize there's more to learn.
Yes, sir.
And we have to be okay with that. But the more you know, you still have more to share than most people. And we
Hmm.
need to be sharing these stories. We really, really do.
Yes. No, we do. And I love that you said that. Like when you said that, I'm gonna try to make a point off of that. But this for me goes back to parenting.
Mhm.
I don't know how you feel, but I'll speak for myself. I feel like we do the greatest disservice to our children and the next generation if we're not willing to be honest about a lot of the choices and the decisions that we made, even the ones that didn't go well, even the ones that you
Mm.
would consider mistakes or failures.
Yep.
Because, and I don't want to speak for you as a father, but for me, I'm not expecting to prevent my son or any future children I may have from all issues. That would be foolish. But if I can help alleviate some of those unnecessary pain points or hardships that he may have to go through, I feel like it is my responsibility to do so. But you can't learn if I'm not willing to share.
Yeah.
If I keep all that in because of my pride, like, I don't want to tell him about, I got my heart broken 3 times. Um, really embarrassed. So I don't want to
Mm.
tell him that. I want to still be his Superman. So I don't want him to look
Oh,
at me as weak and yet
damn.
watch him go through the same experience. And then I'm like, it's literally what I did.
Yeah.
Why didn't I just tell him that? He probably, we could have talked. Not saying, I could have saved him from it. We could have talked about it and maybe it would have helped him get out faster. Right.
Yeah. Or even if he just has exactly the same experiences, despite you warning him, hey, this is what happened to me, and he does
Yes.
exactly the same thing, at least then it's going to be easier for our kids to come to us and go, hey, this has happened. Because they know, dad's been there. He
Right.
knows. He
I'm
knows
not
what
going to
this is
judge you.
like. Yeah,
I'm like,
exactly.
I already bared my soul to you. You saw, I was like, hey, I was devastated, son. I was
Yeah.
completely devastated for a year.
Yeah.
And it was hard for me to pick myself up, but I had to utilize support and family. And I went to therapy and whatever other things I did that helped me. I feel like that's like another driving force, if you will, for me in making this platform and sharing these experiences and trying to learn as well.
Mm.
Because I'm not the arbiter of truth or know
Mm.
everything. But I say that because to me, that's how you make that change. That's how I can do my part to be a part of that change. Is young men, also young men that are not my kids or my child, to give them some of that wisdom, some of that experience that they may not be hearing elsewhere. Which is why I think
Mm.
it's important, as you've pointed out, to have these types of discussions on these public forums and platforms. Because somebody might click with that and be like, I don't have a father that's telling me this stuff. I don't have an
Mm.
uncle or an older brother or a mother or a sister or an aunt or a grandparent that's telling me these things. I'm just out here making mistakes left and right that if somebody was there, maybe I wouldn't have. You
Yeah.
know, I feel compelled to want to help those people by simply doing exactly what you said, just by sharing.
Yeah.
I did this. I'm not saying I'm you and you're not me. And I'm not saying all our experiences are the same, but if you found yourself in a similar circumstance, perhaps you may want to consider this.
Mm.
Perhaps you may want to try this and see if that helps you.
Yeah.
I feel like we can all do a better job of doing that, even for those of us that are not in the mental health field. We can do that
Mm.
for our siblings, for our children, for if you want to mentor a young person, like whatever that may be. I think we can all do that. I don't know if you would agree.
Oh, absolutely. I think the stories that come from our individual lived experiences are what connect us. They really do.
Yeah.
And it means that conversations that we share, conversations that we have, they're not just those surface level conversations all the time that
Yes.
seem almost meaningless. And there's been times that I've had those experiences in the past. I've gone out with some friends, and then a few years ago now, I then come back and my girlfriend, who's now my wife, would say, "Oh, did you have a nice night?" Like, yeah, I guess so. We just talked rubbish and drank beer. Oh, okay, sounds great. Elements of it were great, but maybe most of us, some of us anyway, we'll get to a point where actually to have a meaningful relationship with a friend, to have a good friendship, it's deeper than that.
Yes.
We don't just want to scratch the surface of each other and ourselves. Let's take a shovel in and dig and look at what's really going on. I think it's great to have a good dig.
Yes. I wish we would all, and I hope that we all do that more. I feel like, it to me, it creates that deeper connection, right? The more that you feel comfortable being open with somebody else, whoever they
Mm.
are to you. But I say, especially for those of us that are parents, because that helps to model better behavior, right? Because then they can, like, well, my father was he didn't shy away from being open about how he felt. And this is like a selfish wish of mine, that each of us, when we grow up, that we can say that I know my parent as as an individual. I know my
Yeah.
father as a man. I know my mother as a woman, irrespective of her role as my mother or my father. But their hopes, their dreams, their aspirations, their failures, their mistakes, that we feel comfortable enough to express all of that to them.
Mm.
So when we're no longer here, we're like, I have a good sense of who you were, because you weren't
Mm.
always a mother. You weren't always a father. Who were you before?
Yeah.
What did you desire? What did you want? And then when we left and we moved out and we went to college or we got married or whatever we did, how did you continue to evolve as a person? That's a
Yeah.
selfish wish of mine, because I haven't had that opportunity in personally to do that. But I hope for everybody else that we can build those types of connections with each other, particularly those that are parents, because we set the tone with the young ones, right? If we want to have those great relationships, we effectively can. Not that we control them, because we don't, but we can influence them by sitting them down and having those conversations from when they're very young. And they just kind of grow up and it's like, oh, that's how it was in my house. And then some
Mm.
other kids like, oh, wow, we didn't do that. Like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Your dad actually talks to you about stuff, because my dad don't talk to me about nothing. He just sits down and looks at the TV, and then until he goes to sleep and gets up to work, and then the cycle repeats. You
Yeah.
know,
Because that's what his dad
so
did. Yeah.
right. A lot of us are just perpetuating the same thing that we dealt with. And to your to go back to your other point about those of us that are trying to change the cycle, then we have to
Mm.
hold all that,
Yeah.
right? Because we're like, oh, I know better, so I'm trying to do better. But it's
Yeah.
hard because I'm trying to accept that my parent didn't do it for me, but that I feel emboldened enough that I got to do something different. And it's
Yeah.
sometimes it can be hard to reconcile those two. Like, I want to be a part of the change, but it's like, why didn't you? Why didn't you want to
Yeah.
do this? Because you made it harder for me to to grow
Mm.
up and do what I was supposed to do. So I know sometimes it's difficult for us to hold those two truths at the same time.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. We've got to turn that why didn't you into or why couldn't you?
Right.
Because then we know the answer. Because they couldn't.
Right.
Because no one taught them, no one showed them. Yeah, well, no one showed me. Well, actually, now they can because we've got the platforms. We
Hmm.
communicate so much more now. In whether it's one way or two-way communication, there's
Right.
way more opportunities to learn now than
Oh
there's
yes.
ever been. And whether it's through TikTok, YouTube, podcasts, whatever, social media, there's
Hmm.
so many ways that you can learn. So many.
Yeah.
You've just got to look for it. It's
Yeah.
there.
We got to be intentional, right? To seek out that, maybe that wisdom, that experience, that knowledge. I agree with you. I think that's what makes it so hard, is saying, why couldn't you? I feel
Mm,
like you could have. Well, I wasn't in their shoes. So I give, I usually, when I'm talking to like a younger person, I challenge them and say, because I've had to do this exercise myself in relation to my father. You try to put yourself in their shoes and understand a bit about their lived experience. Why might it have been difficult for them to be more open with you, or to affirm and validate you more often, or to give their love more freeingly to you without the conditions maybe that you had to deal with? That's difficult to wrap one's head around, which is why you got to usually be in some type of therapy or done a significant amount
mm,
of self-reflection to even be able to be comfortable navigating that, right? But it's important
yeah,
because it helps us to move forward and say, you know what, okay, you may not have done that. I don't want to simply use that as an excuse and say, well, I'm not going to do it because my father didn't do it. No, 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 no. The cycle got to
mm,
stop somewhere. It's going to
yeah,
stop with me. As hard as it is, I'm going to do what I have to do to not perpetuate that as best as I can moving forward.
yeah.
So I think I
And
think your point's well said.
yeah, we then create a culture where it's okay to do that. And if that's one of the answers to well, why couldn't you to our own parents? It's
Hmm.
often the fathers, often it's the dads. Why
Hmm.
couldn't you? Well, they were in a different culture, and it just did not allow them. The amount of anxiety that it would produce is greater for them to
Mhm.
override their culture. Well, we do have a better culture. I know there's a pushback, and whenever there's cultural shifts, there is always
There
a
will be.
pocket that doubles down on a previous culture and becomes more the opposite. It's what we
Right.
see, and what I would say is it's not their fault they feel the need to do that. They're not stupid because of it. Whenever there's a cultural shift, whether it's in the political field or it's in whether it's about gender identity or whatever it
Hmm.
is, there is a pushback because people don't like change.
Agreed.
Familiarity is safe, and it's hard to be okay
You're
with
right.
change. Well, my job is
100%.
all about change, so I'm quite
Hmm.
used to it. I embrace change. Like I said, I moved house a year or so ago. No, it was a year. It was that almost exactly a year ago actually, because it was August when we bought it. Moved house, and I laughingly, jokingly said to my wife the other day, "I'd move if it wasn't for stamp duty, which in the UK is absolutely ridiculous. It's ridiculous amount of tax. Oh, if it wasn't for stamp duty, I'd move house every year. This is great." She's like, "What? It's the most stressful thing she's ever experienced." Well, not for me, because I like change. I'm okay with
Right.
variety. I'm comfortable. We lived in our previous house for 20 years. I'm happy with that. I
Wow.
don't mind. It's fine. But I needed an office. So I didn't have an office. So I want an office. So we moved. And yeah, I got the bug. I'd move again. She's like, "What already? What's wrong with this?" "Oh, it's fine. But if it wasn't for stamp duty, I'd happily move again. If you're not happy, and honey, if you're not happy in this house we've lived in for a year and we need to move, we'll just move. It's fine. If you're not happy here, because I can live anywhere as long as I've got an
Yeah.
office." And she's like, "Oh, I don't know about that, because that would be change." Well, change is good. Change is great, but not for everybody. Her lived
Right.
experience is different to mine. Maybe because she's an
Yes.
only child. I don't know. But some people just don't like change, and they'll double down on maybe beliefs that a part of them knows it's wrong that I think this, but I have to think this. And
Right. I'm so
unless we
used to this.
override that, yeah, unless we override all of that, men are going to continue with that. Just suck it up, buttercup. You know
Yeah. Oh
what?
no. No, 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 no. We can't. You're
Yeah,
right. You're 100% right. No, we can't. Change is inevitable. So we do have to all get comfortable with it. But
yeah.
to your point for your wife, some of us haven't had maybe the most favorable experiences with change all the time. Not that it's always bad, but
Mm,
also part of that, to be fair, is also perception though. I can perceive change as always being scary. I usually use this example when I talk about like change in terms of being nervous.
mm,
So you could be nervous, anxious, which would be more of like a pessimistic outlook, right? Like, what's it going to be? I don't know. Or you could be nervous, excited, which is a more
mm,
optimistic outlook. It's the
yeah,
same feeling essentially, but it depends on like the spin you put on it. What's the vantage point that you have as you
mm,
describe that experience? Because if I'm excited, I'm like, oh, I don't know what's coming. And that's exciting. Or I
yeah,
can be like, I have no idea what's coming. I'm terrified.
yeah,
Right? It's the same thing. So I think it's important to also, not to validate those feelings, but to also consider like, well, how am I choosing to look at this though?
mm,
Like you said, moving can be invigorating because okay, new environment, new space. Let's breathe it in, try something
mm,
different. Maybe my personality be a little different, or you change your hair, or you change, your clothing, or whatever. There's all these little things that we can do, and it allows us to have different ways to present and to understand and perceive our environment. I think all those things are necessary and important to work on if we do find that we're more resistant to change. Because you're right, it will absolutely continue to happen. And we have to make sure we have the coping skills and the ability to regulate our emotions enough to navigate that, in a
yeah,
safe manner. But I know not everybody does. And because sometimes change can seem like it's happening so quickly, that can further entrench a group of people into their way of thinking. But on the other side, if you feel like change isn't happening fast enough, it can also propel people to want to accelerate what they're doing because they're like, hey, you guys you're not moving fast enough. Like this should have been resolved already. And it's still a problem. That could be, like you said, gender identity or gender expression, climate change could be another one, politics. Like, why are we still dealing with this? Let's go. Hello. And we know that takes time. You and I'm sure we know that very well. Change takes time. Progress is incremental and it's slow, but progress can still be progress.
Yeah.
So that also depends on, how we choose to look at it. I do want to ask you though on this topic, because I feel like these might be interconnected for you. What caused you to want to create the podcast that you have currently?
I realized that the technology existed to be able to support my clients in between their sessions. That's how it started.
Okay.
I wanted to give my clients, because this was before I was a psychotherapist. This was when I was just doing hypnotherapy.
Mm.
And I wanted to give them access to just some hypnotherapy recordings to listen to in between their sessions. So I put them onto a website and gave them access to it with a little password thing. And I thought, well, I wonder if I could just have a bit of an extra audio content here. I guess because I'd always wanted to be a DJ, and I was trying to get
Right.
more comfortable with the sound of my own voice, which
Sure.
even after 20 years of podcasting, I still don't like the sound of my own voice, contrary to popular belief. I don't like it. I tolerate it. It's fine. I
Right.
must like it enough because sometimes you can't shut me up. But I wanted something on there, knowing there's things I can do on there that means that it's just a little bit of something extra for my clients. That it's one thing to say, sure, I'll be your therapist. We'll have a session every 2 weeks. This is what we'll do. This is what I'll give you access to. And there'll also be this thing on my website. And I think it started like that. And I didn't release it to the general public for at least a year.
Mm.
And I did these little short things, mostly about weight loss and motivation at the time. And after a few months of that, uh, I noticed that there were these things called podcasts out there in the iTunes land. I thought, I've got to jump on this. I've got to, rather than it just being me saying, hi, everybody, it's Richard again. So I wanted to talk a little bit about leaving food on your plate, or getting motivation to exercise or whatever. I thought,
Right.
no, let's do something really for the public, not just for my clients, but something for everybody to listen to as a marketing ploy, potentially. I mean, maybe it was
Sure.
there in my head
Sure.
that says, well, this is something that potential clients will look at and go, yeah, of course I'm going to see that guy. He's got a podcast. It probably did that did play a part, but it certainly evolved as time went on to
Mm.
become a lot more. And now because it was just a monthly podcast that I did. Now I make a weekly one on Patreon for people, which is a paid subscription thing, but it's not expensive. It's just to make sure that people have see that there's value to it and they're willing to contribute, because it does
Right.
take a day. It's a day a week. It is work, but in that day, because at the minute on Patreon, I've probably got 200 and something
Mm.
supporters, and out into the public field, whether there's the monthly ones that I put out there, there's probably that's many thousands. That's 20,000, 30,000 downloads pretty much instantly from the first, as soon as the episode is released.
Mm.
That's a day's work. A day's work, and I've done something to help 20,000 people. You
Right.
can't do that as a therapist. The most we can see without going slightly crazy ourselves is, depending on the sort of work you do, maybe 7 clients in a day, maybe 8 if you're doing a lot of CBT and you're not
Mm.
really listening to them. But if you're doing proper, deep psychodynamic, let's get to know you, deep work, I can only see about 6 people and I'm done. Absolutely done.
Mm-hmm.
That's a day's work seeing 6 people. Well, in a day's work, I've helped 20,000 just like that. No, not just like that, but it was
They
a
have
day's
access to
work.
you though. Right.
Yeah. And I think we've got an ethical. I think maybe once I saw the figures going up on my podcast stats, I'm like, oh, I can't not do this. It's unethical to not. Which is why I started with the Patreon thing to go, well, let's at least mean I get paid for this.
Right. No, no, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I think, first of all, it is very exciting for me to hear what you said as a fellow creator and podcaster and just getting started in the space. That's very encouraging to hear. Um, Even the motivation, like you said, about the impact,
Mm,
because that's what started all this for me, was realizing that as well. Was well before I even started doing it, was just thinking that, man, I've always wanted to be able to impact as many people as possible with the information and with sharing experience. And you're right. We can only do so many in one day, in one week, healthily, because I'm a big
mm,
believer in boundaries and self-care.
yeah.
And so there's no way I'm ever going to be able, or we will ever be able to match our individual caseloads with the amount of people that we can impact and reach if we're doing podcasting or other types of content out there.
Mm,
So I agree with you. It's a great way to reach more people. It could be in between sessions. It could be how somebody finds you before they even want to start working with you, or it could just be a part of their process when they're just figuring out, hey, maybe I have something I need to work on, right? As like sort of like an encouraging point. I'm
yeah.
just trying to figure out where I would begin, but I've been listening to you for a while and you've sort of given me some feedback without me even talking to you to
Mm,
focus on some areas. And once I realized that, that's what created this. That's what made me want to do this. So I very much appreciate you sharing that experience, especially for somebody like me who is very new into the space and getting started. And I do hope sincerely that more of us do this,
mm,
especially if there's other, again, no disrespect to our female colleagues, but if there's other men out there as well, because a big thing for me is visibility and representation, like we talked about earlier. A lot of times people don't know that we're here and that we exist, because most of the time, like you said, when you think of a provider, when you look on a database or a platform, you typically will see a lot of white women as the practitioners. And again, this is nothing against them, but for a lot of people that are male or that come from different ethnic groups, it helps to see and work with somebody who has some of those commonalities and shared experiences right off the bat.
100%. Yeah.
So I think that, if more of us were like on each other's platforms, or we started our own and we were sharing our experiences, there's a lot of learning that we can all take from each other.
Mm,
And I would encourage us as well. I'm certainly encouraged by talking to you, because that motivates me further to continue doing what I'm doing, knowing the level of impact that you've been able to have so far in your journey.
yeah. Yeah.
So that I,
Do
I
it.
love that, man. I love it.
Do it.
And to
Brilliant.
kind of segue into our, the final topic, is thinking about like your future, whether
Mhm.
you want to look at it from a personal or professional perspective. How do you see things going forward, or what are some of the ideas that you want to continue to push forward in the near future?
Yeah. I mean, because I like change, and I'm quite. Maybe I've got a. Maybe I'm slightly. It's it's possible I've got slight ADHD traits. I do find tangents, and I do leap onto the next thing. What am I going to do next? What am I going to do next? And
Yeah.
I've learned over the last 10 years to channel channel my focus into the right place and concentrate on the things that are working, and not try and set up another YouTube channel for something else or anything like that. What are you doing? Why have you built a website about about books? What's that? I like books. Built a website about them. Why? Yeah. I've learned to focus my attention. I want to play to my strengths and look at what
Right.
is working and what people do enjoy. And people do enjoy my podcasts. I've got two podcast projects that are ongoing. There's my own, which is the Richard Nichols podcast. Well, I suppose there's three, because there's my monthly Richard Nichols podcast, and then there's my Patreon one, and also there's one that I do once a week with my supervisor Fiona Biddle, called Therapy Natters, where we just, a little bit like we've done today, we just turn the mic live and we talk, and we've got questions submitted, so we know what we're going to talk about. We listeners have sent us questions, and
Right.
we just talk about theory, and what if that was a client that had come to us with that problem. We know what sort of things we would do, and we offer some advice and support, and it's really a lot of fun. I want to carry on doing that. We've only just started doing that. We started that this year. That's something I really want to focus on. So I
Beautiful.
really and promote that. What I'd love to do is make the time to record some more video, because I've been doing audio for 12 years now. And I'd like to
Yeah.
do more video for Patreon, probably, but I'd like to. I wish I could get it all out there for free, but you put it out there for free and you don't pay your rent.
Right,
If I can,
right. No, for sure.
if I can make it affordable, I mean, that's the. If I can get enough enough Patreon subscribers, I can drop that to just to just to cover the processing fees and just a little bit, just to make it
Sure.
worth my while. But what I'd like to do is put together a course, I suppose, of self therapy. What I'd
Mm,
want is so that somebody has got somewhere to go that goes, if I cannot afford the £50 a week, $100 a week,
right.
whatever it's going to be to see a therapist, what am I going to do in the meanwhile while I'm saving
Sure.
up for that?
Love
How
that.
can I be my own therapist? And I'd like to make something like that that says, this is what therapy is. And if you're going to do this for yourself with some self reflection and journaling and so on, this is how to do it. And make like a series of videos that they listen to once a week with some homework in between. It lasts a
Yeah.
year or something like that. I think it'd be really, really good. I want to make the time to do that. I really do.
That would be beautiful.
Yeah.
I love that idea. And you
Yeah.
hit one of my buzzwords, Richard. You said journaling. That's
Yeah.
a buzzword for me because
Yeah.
I am such a big believer in journaling. I've actually had a similar thought of maybe producing content specifically for people who can't afford it. Because
Mm,
I obviously know that, all of us are not in people's budgets necessarily.
mm,
So I've thought about trying to go into maybe like crafting a custom journal, like personally, to maybe help
mm.
somebody like they purchase it and then they can use that to kind of guide them through introspective reflection for a period of time. Little
Perfect.
things like that, but definitely on the video side. To echo your point,
Mm,
obviously we're recording video. I
mm,
always release these episodes both in both formats, and mainly because I love video. Not that I have nothing against audio, but I love watching people talk. That's like my favorite thing to do. And so I've been very big on trying to put this on, so many platforms, YouTube being one of the main ones. Um, Precisely because of what you're talking about. Like I fully understand and respect that everybody can't afford to come into therapy, and I'm very aware of that. And so
mm,
this is my attempt to give them something of value that I'm not expecting necessarily compensation for, that can
mm,
help them, because I'm not being compensated to do this. I'm doing this just because I feel compelled and inspired to do so.
mm,
So that's why I'm trying to set up all these conversations and do this, because this is my way of trying to give back to these people and these communities that I cherish, and that I want us to all be able to live more fulfilling lives. Right.
mm.
But to your point, I understand it can be a challenge, right? There's definitely costs associated with doing this type of work. So I'm hoping maybe I'll do something similar like to you, set up a Patreon or something for some behind the scenes type stuff, or maybe some additional work that you're trying to help somebody with while they're in between sessions, or
Yeah.
to help them, like, select somebody, something like that. I think it's important. The general takeaway I have for you in this particular space is, get started, put it out there, because it can impact a lot of people. And we have a lot of experience that we can speak to, both personally and our own lived experiences, but also for those of people that we've worked with, of course, maintaining confidentiality. And so I see the value there. That's why you're here, and that's why we're talking. And
Mm,
I definitely appreciate and encourage everybody who is watching or listening to check out your different podcasts that you have, because I want us to support each other. I think as men in these spaces, it sometimes
yeah.
where we can be very disconnected and disjointed. So I want us to try to support each other more often.
I just remembered I wrote a book as well once.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's been translated into a few different languages. It's
Okay.
called
15
15
minutes to
Minutes to
happiness.
Happiness.
There
Yeah,
we go.
I was never that convinced about the title, but it wasn't my idea. It was the publisher's idea. But
Okay.
that's fine. I mean, it's a series. I'll leave that there. It's a book about what you can do in 15 minutes to help your mental health. It's not
Mhm.
about you can get happy in 15 minutes. It's about
Right.
introducing things that take as up to 15 minutes, but deep breathing exercises don't even take that. The things that you can incorporate into your day that research has shown to promote well-being and happiness. And that it's all about journaling. Every chapter in this says, and here are your journal prompts. Here's your mindfulness exercise.
There you
Here's
go.
the here's the questions to prompt you. It's every single page, not every single page, but every single chapter. There it is. Journal suggestions. Is there something in life that you can't imagine living without? Let's write about it. What do you love
Mm,
about life? Imagine all goes well and you achieve your goals in life. What's your ideal future like? When you answer those questions, you get to know yourself. You get to know your values, and with that, you can rebuild if it didn't exist in the first place. Because sometimes somebody's sense of self doesn't even exist. It's just not
right.
there. They were never given a
You're
chance to
building it up for the
develop
first
it.
time.
Yeah. And they could be doing that age 50 if they have to. We need to promote those sorts of attitudes and those sorts of questions and get people's sense of self blossoming. We really do.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And shout out to you for having that book. I didn't realize you were
I
also a
forgot.
published author. So no,
Yeah,
no,
published
no.
author.
But that's
Yeah, yeah.
awesome. That's awesome. I think
Mm,
like you said, these are the different skills and experiences that we have. There may be different formats. We know people resonate with different formats. Like there's different things you can prescribe to them. Some people like bibliotherapy is like, hey, I'm going to give you promote and encourage several books that can help you while you're working with me. Some people might, there might be certain meditations that they might listen to or certain mindfulness music or practices they might do. Obviously, me making a lot of this video content, not that I'm going to prescribe somebody to listen to me, but that could help somebody. That might be again like a starting point for somebody.
yeah.
And that's sort of how I perceive that. So there's different ways that we might interact with and engage people that we might not even be aware of. But the point is, if we put that information out there, we put those experiences out there, who knows how many people we may touch,
Mm,
and who knows how many lives we may not change necessarily just because of us, but we may be a part of that change, which is how I
mm.
always look at therapy. Right? We don't change them; they're changing themselves. We're just a part of that
Yeah,
process
we're the
for them.
conduit. Yeah,
Right? And we help
yeah.
facilitate that. So I agree with you 100%. I don't have a book that I'm currently writing, but I definitely have that thought. But I've had other people that I've interviewed who have courses, they have books they're writing or they've already released. They have other video content. Some people are trying to get into podcasting. So you've hit on a lot of interesting points that I think in terms of content, whatever medium that may be. I think it's very important for us to, especially for those of us that are providers, right? And especially if we're a male provider,
Mm.
to put yourself out there. It
Do.
can be a bit nerve wracking. I definitely agree with you. Because you could be worried about how are people going to perceive you. But I would hope that, or this is at least what I tell myself, if you're doing things in good faith and you are trying to put things of value that you know that people can appreciate, that can utilize in their day-to-day life, that irregardless of how people may respond, like you can go to sleep at night knowing that you're trying to do good work.
Yeah.
The same way like you will with a client. If you get a client that's very resistant and unwilling to make any sort of concessions or adjustments to their perception or their outlook on life, you it wouldn't be wise to put all that on yourself and say like, well, I'm failing them because they don't want to do anything. I would challenge that. I would say, no, it's more about them. It's not really about you. If they
Mm,
don't want to put in the effort, maybe they're not ready. Maybe they're not at that stage of change yet. So they may need to maybe fall a little bit more, as I would sometimes say, before they kind of have that wake up call, that epiphany. Oh, the light bulb went off. I need to do some work here.
mm.
And so to keep us motivated, because it can't be myself only, certainly can't be Richard only. Like a lot of us need to be a part of this process. And I hope that for anybody that might be listening to this or that had watched this, especially if you are considering going into the field, going right back to the beginning of the discussion with what Richard said, please be encouraged to try. I don't care if you're in high school, you're in middle school, you're in elementary school, and you're just like interested in this field. That I hope that you feel comfortable to seek out fellow providers, to reach out, email. I don't know if you do those type of consults at all, Richard. I don't necessarily specialize in them, but if somebody reached out to me, I would totally, give them whatever guidance I could. But just to seek out that type of interest, if you have that, because we certainly need more. There has to be more of us in this field if we're really going to help reach a lot more of the men here in the world. I don't know if
Yeah.
you would agree.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. That's it. We know what to do. It just needs to happen.
Yeah, I concur, sir. Well, either way, this has been very, very enlightening for me. And I'm sure there's going to be plenty of folks out there that would very much appreciate everything that you said and a lot of gems you dropped during this discussion. So thank you for your vulnerability and just being willing to be open about a lot of your experiences. I always am appreciative because I know that it's not something that is like automatic for us. We still really have, a lot of us have to really still work at
Mm.
putting ourselves out there in this way, being comfortable, being on camera and being vulnerable because other people are going to see us, and truly being okay with that, regardless of whatever comments or judgments may be made. I think we had a very authentic experience here today. So I'm
Mm.
very much
Yeah.
in appreciation of you being here and all the great work that you're doing. So for anybody out there that got some value from this, I hope you would consider liking and subscribing to my podcast and my platform, because it really does help me to keep doing this type of work, to bring in very nice individuals like Mr. Nichols here. And hopefully, and we'll catch you on the next time when we have another video ready to drop. So we'll say that's going to be the end. And I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Peace out.
Peace out.